Hello YouTube and fellow DC Comic fans, I'm Keith One Shot, and this is the original origin of Martian Manhunter from DC Comics. We start this story off with an old couple, who are both laying down asleep in bed. Then we hear the thoughts of the old man. I just couldn't sleep. My wife was snoring like a chainsaw, and a radio down the street was playing White Noise by something called The Crew. But that wasn't the problem. It was this dream that came out of the blackness, like a thick fog lifting. I kept seeing my friend John Jones, and besides him, a creature I only knew as the Martian Manhunter. It didn't make sense. John had been killed on the line of duty during a police raid in '68, and I'd never even met the Manhunter. Why would I suddenly... Oh God! I remember! The old man suddenly gets out of bed. Then he goes over and grabs a picture from his side table. Then he thinks to himself, hard to believe it happened so long ago. Seems like 10 minutes ago I was 30 years old, and retirement was for the old gray boys, with the flat feet and bad backs. Not a kid like me. When it started, I was still on foot patrol to John's full-fledged detective. John was really something. He even dressed the part, wearing stylish threads that made Peter Gunn look like a drunk after a 3-day binge. John was a one-man police force, notching more collars than the rest of us combined, and making it look easy. He collected commendations like postage stamps, and could have made Captain No Sweat if he wanted it. Strange though, looking back, I can never remember him smiling. He accepted the accolades and the awards, but John wasn't in it for the glory. There was something else. It was one of the ugliest cases in the history of the city. The mayor stepped on some mob toes in his citywide reform campaign, and the mob hit back by kidnapping his little girl. We were stumped and running out of time. I was alone finishing up some paperwork when John stumbled into the squad room. I knew he'd been putting in long hours on the kidnapping, but this wasn't fatigue. He looked like he'd been hit by a truck. No, make that a fleet of trucks. I was scared. John never suffered so much as a sniffle, but now he was sick, feverish, and his color looked terrible. I helped him to the station house cot, and he folded like a paper doll. When I looked away, he was a man. When I looked back, okay, so he was a Martian. I could handle that. My heart was pounding like a Gene Krupa solo, and you could have mistaken my eyes for ping pong balls. But a cop is, trained to handle the unexpected. It was about then the movie started. I call it a movie because I don't know how else to describe it. Then all I knew was that to understand what happened that night, I needed to understand the Manhunter, and his past. I started to see. It began with a scientist named Erdell, and an experiment gone wild, seeking to collect specimens of new life with a particle beam. Erdell instead found Martian John Jones, and brought him to Earth. Dr. Erdell hadn't expected to find sentient life with his beam, which was small comfort to the stranded Manhunter. Personally, I would have been ticked. All this was compounded when Erdell collapsed. Believing him dead, John was forced to make his way into the Earth world alone. That's tough enough for us Earth people. For a Martian, it was a major challenge. Physically, fitting in wasn't a problem. John was blessed with incredible powers. He could mold his body into almost any form, mimicking anything, or anybody. He could turn invisible. He was telepathic. He could probably slice, dice, and grate too. The question was, what was he going to do? He was equipped with a basic sense of right and wrong, and Erdell had left him with a functional grasp of language and customs. But the late 50s and early 60s were a strange time for some reason. Or maybe no reason. Americans were afraid of almost everything. I think most of the hysteria came out of the threat of war, and the bomb. Our fear expressed itself in many ways, but most vividly in the media. Conquest and world domination had no special allure for John Jones. Still, good intention or no, it just wasn't the right time for superpowered Martians, so he turned to the only source of information available to him for guidance. He was fascinated by television. With Martian telepathy, visual forms of communication were unnecessary. Why go to the bother, when you can peer into the storyteller's mind, and experience a vision firsthand? Maybe that's why he was so intrigued with the tube. It brought back the joy of surprise. There were no minds to read, no instantaneous give and take. He was forced to accept the vision at face value. It was television's golden age, and cop shows were hot. Night after night, week after week, the good guys triumphed over the bad guys. He found his calling. On TV, the cops fought for justice, and they always wore snappy clothes, and had the respect of their community. Real cops knew the truth wasn't nearly so glamorous, but it didn't matter. For the Martian Manhunter, the TV reality was truth. He wanted to fight for justice. He set out to become a cop, cloaking himself in invisibility. He followed the police into a series of skirmishes, taking mental notes on procedure and law. Occasionally he interceded, especially in dangerous situations. Looking back, there was a strange pattern to some of our more spectacular collars. Vicious suspects would suddenly turn meek as kitty cats, raving about some mysterious invincible green monster, with a forehead the size of a continental shelf. We chalked it up as a crazy mass hallucination. One day, he was ready. Now the 50s and 60s were a more innocent time, but even then, you didn't just waltz into a police station and become a detective. For the Martian Manhunter, the problem was even more complicated. He didn't have any of the documentation of modern society. No birth certificate, references, work history. Heck, he'd never even paid taxes. And he was looking for a high security job in the police force, so using his telepathy, he created Detective John Jones. Suddenly, Duncan and John had been acquainted for years. Family barbecues, the bowling team, you name it. Bill Ralston and John had gone to the same high school, lettered together on the wrestling squad. And me? For a beat cop and a top-ranked detective, John and I were pretty close. The kidnapping case had been hard on all of us, but especially John. Now I understood why. With all his powers, it still took him precious hours to locate the kidnapper's hideout, an abandoned but still operational steel foundry. The Manhunter had developed some surprisingly human emotions, like frustration and anger, but the kidnappers had unwittingly found the perfect hideout. With all the Martian Manhunter's powers, came one glaring weakness: fire. The flames tore into the Manhunter like gunfire. The pain must have been unbearable. With superhuman effort, he managed to crawl away from the flames and stagger back to police headquarters. Maybe he'd planted that best buddy business in my mind, but as time passed, I developed a real kinship with John. He was forced to tell me of his past, so I could understand his fear of fire. But there was more to it than that. I think he needed the help and trust of a friend. The kidnappers were sure to be on guard after the Martian Manhunter's grand entrance. With time running out, I couldn't wait for reinforcements. I was going to have to do this one on my own. I didn't really have a plan until I saw the control panel. If there was an on switch, then there had to be an off. The mob goons spotted me 3 steps across the floor. The bullet in my shoulder felt like a hot poker, but nothing was going to stop me. I fell across the control panel and slapped every switch I could find. I slid to the floor as shock set in. I was dizzy and the room was spinning. Maybe that's why I remember it like I do. The Martian Manhunter was a green blur, exploding through the walls of the foundry as if it were paper. If he wanted, he could have turned those 2 hoods into supersonic grease spots. He satisfied himself by slamming them backwards at 60 miles per hour. They saw stars faster than the crowd on Oscar night. Then he cradled the mayor's little girl like a robin's egg, and carried her gently to freedom. When it was over, I woke up in a local hospital, with a painful bullet wound, and a nasty case of amnesia. I'd been shot cracking the biggest case in the city's history. It was an adventure I'd never forget. But I did. Why was I remembering it all now? About then I felt a chill down my spine, and I realized I wasn't alone. He hadn't changed a bit. He didn't have to speak. I just knew. John had made me forget. To protect me from the Manhunter's enemies. To protect his secret. He probably had dozens of reasons. I sensed that he'd been discovering some frightening truths about his own past, and realized how important memories can be. Maybe that's why he decided to unlock our little secret. Or maybe he just wanted to see a friend, for old time's sake. Oh God, I remember! And so does he! We then see Martian Manhunter hug his old friend, and that ends today's story. This has been the original origin of Martian Manhunter, and I'm your host Keith One Shot. If you like this video, make sure to check out the rest of the videos on my channel. Like and subscribe, take care, have a great day, and goodbye!